Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back for another gathering of our proud, plucky, patriotic subscribers here to Hopium. We have a lot to talk about tonight. This has been, Epstein's really good friend, Donald Trump, has had a hard couple days. Even today, the House Republicans failed again to pass a rule to advance their crypto bill, which this was supposed to be a big week of celebration around crypto that they've been unable to get through. We know now that Mike Johnson and other leading Republicans have called on Trump to release the Epstein files, and all of a sudden, this sort of his iron grip over the party feels to be a little wobbly today. I mean, there's been a lot of things that have not gone well for Donald Trump politically, but one of them is he's been able to keep his coalition together, the Republicans together, and that has started to, he's started to struggle with that a little bit. And so let's go back and try to catch up on where we are, and let me just make some observations about this moment and as we head deeper into the summer. Look, I think that, Trump, we in one predicate for this is just to remind ourselves of this basic understanding that we have at Hopium that there are two things that can be true at the same time. One is that Trump is doing incredible damage to the country. His agenda of sabotage, plunder, and betrayal is breaking things and including things that will be very difficult, if not impossible, to repair. And that's why we have to work with the urgency that we all have. But what's also true is that Trump, the politician, the elected official, the actor playing this role of a wannabe dictator and having these dictatorial fantasies, that this project is not going well. And even though they are grinding their way through their agenda and achieving things that I think it's very hard to believe with the help of not only a complicit Congress, but also a deeply corrupt enabling Supreme Court, that they continue to do things that are bringing material and serious harm to the country. But Trump, the play, Trump, the movie, Trump, the story, Trump, the character, is not doing well. And it's important to keep these things distinct because they both can be true simultaneously. And so what happened, in my view, over the last few months is that Trump's tariffs, the Liberation Day tariffs in the beginning of April, hurt him. And it hurt the economy. It hurt confidence in him. Wall Street and the global economic system started believing that this guy was as batshit crazy as we all knew he was going to be. And then his numbers went way down, and he took a huge hit in polling. And he was already in a lower, in a slightly diminished place, right? And then we got through sort of into May, and his approval rating started recovering, and he started coming back. And the project of him being the strongman project, the revered strongman, the North Korean-like dictator that everyone bends the knee to, right? Which is the essential project of the White House every day, is to maintain this fiction, is that he had the split with Elon. And Elon left. They had that event at the White House late May, early June. And then Elon left. And then a few days later, Elon just opened up on Trump and spent 3 days on Twitter, which is stuff that breaks through into the MAGA bubble, right? When he tweets, he's got a bigger following than Trump does, right? And he just spent 3 days kicking the living shit out of Trump. It was unbelievable. And including calling for him to be replaced by JD Vance. It's when he originally introduced this idea that Trump was in the Epstein files, right? And so Trump, it was my view that week fundamentally changed American politics, that Trump was emasculated, that his strongman image, this false story they're telling, was wounded. He was wounded. He and Stephen Miller were both wounded because it sure looks like Elon left town with Stephen Miller's wife. Today, by the way, Stephen Miller's wife, or his former wife, removed any connection to Stephen Miller on her Twitter feed today. So she's now no longer says that married to Stephen Miller. That's no longer the case. And so we had this event, this sort of huge event happen where the two boys running everything sort of were emasculated and had their strongman manliness questioned. And so they lashed out. And they lashed out by escalating in LA, and within a few days, over, essentially a few hundred protesters, we had tens of thousands of National Guard and the Marines called in, within days of all this happening, right? The last sort of major Elon tweet was on Thursday, and by Tuesday, the Marines were in Los Angeles, or Tuesday, Wednesday, right? Like it would happen very quickly. It was a wild and insane overreaction to what was happening. And, we didn't know how the public was going to respond to this, right? I mean, usually when the president sort of mobilizes the military or the National Guard or anything around something they perceive to be a disaster or a war, the country rallies to him. And we got polling back immediately showing the country was not rallying to Trump. They actually didn't like this, and this was unpopular. And all of a sudden, the one issue that Trump had that was still kind of holding for him, immigration, started to evaporate. And then the next sort of thing they did to try to rebuild and reconstitute his manliness and his manhood was the big sad parade that he had with the military where nobody showed up. And we had millions of people all over the country marching, protesting joyfully all across the country. And so his story of manliness, was obscured by our embrace of our great democratic tradition as in this movement that we're all in. And so that was also unsuccessful. And then the next thing he did to change the subject to restore his manhood was he bombed Iran. And, kind of out of nowhere, this was not something he was involved in. And then all of a sudden he thought Bibi was doing a good job and he jumped in. And then that also was rejected by the country. I mean, it was, I think people have written it's the first major military action like this taken in modern times where the country didn't immediately rally to the president. And that was another sign that he was having a hard time getting it up. I mean, his approval rating, that is, right? And that they continued, and what we talked about here was that he was going to continue to look for spectaculars and things that he's addicted to these spectaculars and what Anne Applebaum called the spectacle of power. And so the next one was the big ugly bill signing. By the way, the most unpopular major piece of legislation in modern times. He signed it, and he did it on 4th of July, which I think was a huge mistake because he could have gotten two bites at the apple. He could have signed the bill and he could have had 4th of July, but he conflated them, which I think was actually kind of a tactical error by the White House. And the big ugly continues to be wildly unpopular. And so last week was his big victory lap week. He did the big ugly. He was gonna, have this big week. And the very first thing that happened was the tragedy in Texas, where because of the negligence of the White House, Donald Trump has blood on his hands over what happened down in Texas with the destabilizing of our entire National Weather Service and NOAA. And so that began. And then he then needed another sort of spectacular to build on it. And he did these wild tariffs last week because he had his tariff deadline was coming. And he then, instead of cutting deals, 90 deals in 90 days, they had no deals in 90 days. The world didn't bend their knee to Trump in the way that we in America are not bending our knee, and the courts are not bending our knee here. And the world hasn't bent their knee to Trump. And it made him crazy. And so what he did is he promised, instead of reducing tariffs and cutting deals, he's now committed to double or triple the tariffs that are in place by August 1st in 2 weeks. It was wild, right? It was like the equivalent of throwing ketchup, at the wall, but with the global economy. He, and so we know from, just this week, right? We had inflation is now ticked up 2 months in a row. All the reporting on the inflation, the CPI number this week, was that the tariffs are now starting to really raise prices. To be clear, depending on how you cut the data, last month inflation went up by about 3.5 to 4%. The Fed's number is 2, the target number. It is now starting to escalate. As everyone thought would happen, prices are going up. This is a central reason why Trump's numbers have come down so far. And so even though he's taking huge hits politically over the tariffs and the fact that he betrayed his central promise to all of us that he was going to lower prices and make our lives better, he's now committed in 2 weeks to double or triple the tariffs to most of our trading partners around the world, which will dramatically increase prices on virtually everything in the United States, soon. And this is like his big grand strategy, his way to change the subject, his way to restore his manhood is that he can show these leaders around the world who's boss and who can dictate. And he literally said last week that we're not negotiating anymore. We're just sending letters to people telling them what they must do, and we're expecting them to comply. Because they couldn't actually negotiate deals, because all these deals, they were asking for unilateral concessions. And in many cases, in what were binding treaties or trade agreements that we had negotiated with these countries, the whole thing was so bananas. But then the other thing that happened last week was that Pam Bondi punted on the Epstein files. And I think that many of us didn't really understand the gravity or the significance of that when it happened because we're not steeped in right wing conspiracy theories. But they promised, we've now gone back and looked at this. They promised to release the Epstein files, to prosecute the people who had committed crimes, right? The only person who's been prosecuted from Epstein's reign of horror over all these years is Giselle Maxwell. But none of the men have been prosecuted. And Pam Bondi, was Attorney General of Florida when all this was going on down in Palm Beach, right? Much of the activity, some of it was in New York, but a large, a great deal of the activity with Epstein was in Palm Beach, because Donald Trump, as Epstein once said, Donald Trump is his best friend. They palled around together down in Palm Beach. And so they are yeah, she's been corrupt for a long time, put out there. And so what has happened now is that, in a time when he's already weakened and struggling and been unable to get his poll numbers up, and it doesn't matter what they've done, all these things they've tried, the bombing Iran, the BBB, everything, I mean, the big ugly bill, and now comes this thing, and this created an unbelievable explosion in MAGA world. And Trump has today, I want to just read to you what Trump said today, just so we understand how crazy. This is from USA Today. Let me just read it. President Donald Trump has a message for supporters upset with his handling of records related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. They are weaklings who've been duped, and he doesn't need them. This is a guy who's already, has arguably the lowest approval rating. His approval rating right now is equal to what Biden's was after the Biden debate performance last year, which then caused Biden to have to get out of the presidential election. We're in a place that's similar to that, right? He's already in a terrible place. He's struggling to get his numbers up. And here we are. And so the article continues, Trump lashed out at conservative backers who raised questions about his administration's handling of the Epstein case, slamming them in a July 16th social media post, and again during an Oval Office event for furthering what he described as the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. He's now using this sort of wild Russia analogy, right? And then this is what he said today. And my past supporters have been brought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, Trump said on social media before calling them weaklings and declaring, I don't want their support anymore. I mean, this guy's in trouble, right? Like, this is kind of an unbelievable break inside MAGA world, inside Trump's support. And so today we learn that in terms of who's weak, right? His big crypto week has stalled. They can't get the rule through the House. They can't bring the bill up for a vote now over multiple days. That Mike Johnson and other senators and congressmen broke with the president last night and called for the Epstein files to be released. There could be a petition. This may actually pass the House this week. And all of a sudden, you have this line, right? For those of you who've been parents, is the wheels on the bus go round and round is a book that we read to our kids growing up. But sometimes the wheels go round and sometimes they go flying off. And right now, the wheels are flying off the Trump bus. right? It is incredible what's happening. And I think that we have to remind ourselves at every moment as we talk about in Hopium that for all the grinding and the damage they're doing to the country and to the world, he's also, Donald Trump is weak. He's not strong. He and America are losing. We are not winning. I'm forgetting my own line here. He is a villain. He's not a hero. And we can't let what's happening here. We are watching. Remember, who really pushed this? Elon did. Elon has been pounding on this week. Elon called for Trump to be replaced by Vance. And all of a sudden, we're looking at a presidency that's in trouble. I mean, this is, politically, objectively, Trump is really struggling to manage this. And the thing is, let's just talk for a second about what he's struggling to manage, right? We know that Trump and Epstein were buds. There are video of them at events together. There have been reports and things and court cases and everything else. The notion that Donald Trump, first of all, we know that he sexually assaulted E. Jean Carroll in a department store dressing room. We know that Donald Trump said on a recording that he used to grab him by the thing, the P word, and have his way with women whenever he wanted, right? He's admitted to sexual assault. He was found liable for sexual assault in court cases. And this is now a question of whether or not the simple question is not will they release the files, is whether or not Donald Trump committed heinous crimes, right? And raped young girls. And that's what is at play here. And these are grave and serious matters. And their inability, their clumsy covering all this stuff after Elon kind of said, hey, Trump's in the files, has complete, is starting to cause an incredible meltdown. The first serious meltdown that Donald Trump has ever had with his MAGA base. We are in uncharted waters here. And tonight, and I don't know if you saw the reporting on this, but the prosecutor in New York, with the Southern District of New York, who was the lead prosecutor, who prosecuted both Epstein before and by the way, we all have to remember that Epstein was arrested, charged, and committed suicide while Donald Trump was president. So the person that created the Epstein files and this whole process was Donald Trump and his Justice Department. But the lead prosecutor that made all that happen, who's turns out is James Comey's daughter, which is kind of incredible, was fired tonight from SDNY. We know that Pam Bondi fired her ethics advisor last week. We know that Kash Patel has threatened to resign as FBI director over the handling of all this stuff. This is a wild emerging scandal here because it's not just about money or, pedestrian kind of corruption. This is about grave and serious stuff. And I'm amazed that we're here, but here we are on July 16th. And let me read to you the polling that we got today. In the last 24 hours, we've gotten 4 polls. Quinnipiac, Trump is down 41-54, minus 13. Economist YouGov, Trump is down 41-55, minus 14. Civics, he's down 42-55, minus 13. CNN, 42-58, minus 16. This is really bad polling, right? And we also know that on the issues, he's in deeply negative territory in healthcare, on tariffs, on inflation, things that people really vote on. But he's now getting into double-digit negatives on immigration and deportations. And despite Trump's incredible, the right-wing noise machine, the power, their information superiority, the bully pulpit of the White House, they have lost control of the national dialogue. He is, as I'm now saying, having problems getting it up. And what I mean by that is his approval rating. And this is making him weak and not strong in Washington, right? The approval rating is the coin of the realm. It's the way that people understand weakness and strength. And he is in trouble over this. Let's look at other polling today. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, in a state that Trump lost by 6 points, is ahead by 12 points in a new poll. Mikey Sherrill, in the first poll that was done in New Jersey a few weeks ago, was up by 20 points. way overperforming the 2024 numbers, as we have been doing in all these other races all across the country this year, where we've been overperforming. In the congressional generic, which is this question of who you're going to vote for Congress, Democrats now have solid and sturdy leads in most of the polls. And so even though there's this meme out there that the Democratic Party is weak in the head-to-head contest against Republicans, we are doing well and we're in strong shape, and we should be optimistic that if we keep raising money and keep doing the work, that we're going to have the elections that we want to have in November of this year. And so, I'm encouraged by all this. I just want to say, I guess my final 2 points are this: whatever sort of scenario there is about us getting to the other side of all of this, it starts with Trump looking like he's weak and a failure. And we're basically there. And we have to acknowledge that this is a significant collective achievement by all of us. We all played a role in this. The big ugly bill going so negative was through unbelievable amounts of work from the DNC and the House and Senate Democrats, who just pounded and pounded and pounded on that bill in their districts, in their states. The DNC has now done 140 town hall meetings, I think, by this, since the late winter, early spring. Ads went up. We changed, and what it's showing is that Trump doesn't have the strength to control the information environment. He isn't getting people to bend the knee. This isn't working the way they all thought. There is no scenario where they thought they were going to be in this place right now, where he had the courts being defying him, global leaders defying him, the American people defying him, his poll numbers being in the shitter, right? We had a memo from one of his pollsters, Tony Fabrizio's partner this week, that had Democrats up in the congressional generic very significantly in their internal polling. They know they're in trouble, which is why they're panicking, right? They're panicking about this Texas redistricting. We'll see what happens with that. They're now making noises about, screwing around in the election, right? This is all a sign of panic and weakness and losing and failure, right? Do not turn the Texas redistricting and this kind of noises around the election stuff into something that makes him strong. It makes him weak. It's a sign that he's pathetic and desperate, and they're trying to reach into places and cheat because they know they're going to get their ass kicked, right? And so, again, these are not indicators of his strength, they're indicators of our strength. And we can't turn wins into losses in our side. Finally, my last point is that I think one of the great questions I have is, what is Donald Trump going to do for the next 16 months? He needs spectaculars every day, right? He did today. I keep talking about this. He needs to be the center of attention, right? Some of this is strategic, and some of this is just his impulsiveness and his narcissism, that he just needs everybody talking about him all the time, right? And his delusional state is that today he threatened to fire Powell, and the markets had a wildly adverse reaction, and he kind of pulled back. He doesn't have a lot of things now in the next 16 months to create spectaculars around that are going to help him. The continued immigration enforcement is hurting him politically. His tariffs, which he's been playing around, is hurting him politically and hurting the country. He can't travel abroad because everybody hates him and they don't want him to come visit. What is he going to do? And I think this is a really big question about what is Donald Trump going to do over the next 16 months. I know that sort of the impulse is that he's going to lean really hard into using ICE as this political force that's going to terrorize his opponents and jail Democratic politicians. I don't know that that's going to happen, and I don't think we should assume that's going to happen. I think there really is, he's not in a position right now where him doing things that are so obviously authoritarian and crazy are going to be easy for him to pull off. He's not in a strong position. The country has rejected this politics. It doesn't mean he doesn't go for it. But Stephen Miller and Donald Trump, this big play that they had to, which is the sort of the engine of MAGA, which is this, beating up and, punching hippies and beating up people of color and throwing immigrants into gulags, right? They've gotten all they can out of that. There isn't any more. There's no more juice in the orange there politically for them. It's not working. He's now in the 30s now repeatedly in polling, under his own approval rating on immigration and deportations. And why? Because they went too far. what American would, how many Americans could look at all this and think this is like the country I grew up in, or this is what freedom and democracy looks like? It's just wild overreach. And I wrote a very long piece yesterday about what this immigration policy really means if they really execute it. And if they really try to remove the 10 to 15 million people, it's going to devastate the economy. The business community, the ag community that are already up in arms about this are going to get really up in arms because it's going to destroy small businesses and put farmers out of business. And it's going to limit our growth and it's going to do enormous harm. And it will then further drive his poll numbers down because he'll be taking steps to actually further weaken the country. And so I don't see, if you're a strategist, right? Like, where do they go to get for him to be strong again? It's not really clear, right? There's no place that he's popular. There's no issue that will be good for him to associate with, right? He's made these big plays and they've backfired to him. I've described the tariffs and his deportation strategy is the equivalent of Vietnam's, right? He's not winning them. It's hurting him, but he can't get out of it because of the way he's committed to it. And so how do you, if you're a strategist, how do you restore Trump's strength and the admiration? And don't tell me that he doesn't care about polling. Every day they make it clear that his poll numbers are making them insane. And it's making him crazy. He wants big crowds. He wants to have adulation. He wants to be loved. And the fact that he's being rejected obviously is getting to him. This Epstein stuff is getting to him. I would argue that in the last 24 hours, we have seen the wildest and most destructive and corrosive public performances, arguably since Trump came down the escalator in 2015. He's losing it, folks. Like, he's cracking under this pressure. He knows there's big trouble here. And I think there is a possibility that there is, this is why I think we have to distinguish between MAGA and the movement and Trump, right? They've got a successor lined up, JD Vance, that many of them will be happy with. And if Trump has outlived his usefulness, right, well, then maybe it's time to make a change. That's what Elon said in early June. Said we need to get Vance in there and get Trump out of there, right? And so I think that I want to conclude by saying that yes, the MAGA project and the destruction and the revamping of our system and the corruption of our judiciary by the Supreme Court and all the things that they've aspired to, they've had more success in doing all this than any of us would want. But at the same time, Trump, the movie, Trump, the strongman, Trump, the play, Trump, the show, is not doing well. And both of these things can be true at the same time. And so, where does this all take us? I don't know. But somehow it feels like in the last 24, 48 hours that we've crossed into a new place in this second Trump term, that he is struggling and flailing, and his coalition is angry. He's being attacked by his most loyal supporters. This is a big deal because it does something that I talk about, that I've been talking about a lot over the last couple of months, is that Democrats have to learn how to not only contest issues, but we have to contest this other battery of attributes of leaders around strength and weakness, winning and losing, right? Succeeding, failing, hero, villain, that we have to learn how to contest that too. We failed to contest that in 2024. We contested issues as part of our polling, the way we do research. And what I've been talking about here is that we have to do both. We have to contest the traditional issue landscape, which arguably we've been doing a pretty good job at, and Trump is in negative terrain in all the major issues that people are going to vote on. But we also have to attack him as a leader, and we need to make him weak and not strong, failing, not succeeding. We need to make him a loser and not a winner. We need to make him a villain and not a hero. We can do both of these things. And right now, this guy is looking like a villain and not a hero. He looks like he's weak and not strong. He looks like he's failing, not succeeding. He looks like he's losing, he's not winning. And that's what we need to degrade him to the point that we can not only mitigate the damage that they're doing, take away the authority that he has and the power that he has over the party in Washington, which you already are seeing crack this week in ways that we haven't really seen before, right? And since he's been in the presidency, and to degrade him, to mitigate the damage, to regain power, to execute our agenda, and to start putting the country back together after this terrible reign of Trump. Those are my thoughts for you tonight. Thanks, everybody. And a reminder that if you like these talks, please subscribe to Hopium, share them with your friends. Like, when you hit like inside of Substack or on YouTube, wherever you watch this, it helps bring it to other people because it triggers the algorithm. And so one of the things I'm asking all the Hopium folks is that we need to like Hopium stuff more, both on Substack, but also in the other platforms we're using. So it gets into the stuff can be seen by more people. And if you like the talk tonight, email it out to your friends, either on Substack or on YouTube, where you can find it. You can also find it on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And so thanks for being here, everybody. It's great to be with all of you. Yes, we, we should recognize that something very significant has happened, that Donald Trump has lost control of the national discourse. He is not all powerful. And now we got to go on offense and continue to prosecute our agenda. But we also need to continue to degrade him and weaken him so we can mitigate the damage. Thanks, everybody. Let me get to questions. Lincoln has summarized some of the main themes that we're hearing tonight. Yeah, I mean, I didn't. There's been some questions about Ukraine. I wrote about this week. I don't believe that Donald Trump has had some kind of major change of heart about Putin. I think that, if he had wanted to really whack Putin, he would have put sanctions on immediately. He would have not have given him 50 days. He would have given weapons directly to Ukraine and not in this indirect way where NATO is now buying weapons from us. We're not giving them anymore. So he put up these kind of barriers. And yes, it was good. I mean, Ukraine's going to get more weapons in this kind of roundabout way. But what Trump really did, I hope everyone understands this, right, is that he forestalled a bill in the Senate that would have put very onerous sanctions on Russia, that had 82 co-sponsors, and Mike Johnson said he would support and pass in the House, which has been ready to go. And now John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has pulled that bill. So Trump, by doing this little dance where he pretended that he gave a shit about Ukraine and Zelensky, for 24 hours, achieved something really important for Russia, which is this bill didn't pass, which it would have passed. And it also would have been a big problem for Donald Trump in the middle of this shitstorm over Epstein. He would have had potentially another rebellion happen against him where he would have had to potentially veto a bill calling for hard sanctions on Putin because I don't think he actually agrees with it. If he agreed with it, he would have called the bill up and he would have signed it. And instead, they've actually delayed the bill again. And so I think in a way that, I think some of the reporting on this week has been kind of naive and ignorant. I believe this relationship between Trump and Putin is one of the great stories of our time, and I don't ever believe that Trump is ever going to break significantly from Putin. And certainly, I think this week I think there was a misinterpretation of what went really down. You could make the argument that Trump delivered a massive win for Putin this week, regardless of how it got played by a complicit legacy media here in the US. Um, yeah, I think that, look, I don't know, as I was saying earlier, I got a lot of questions about ICE, right? And these are legitimate, and I'm sorry about my video light tonight. I don't know what happened here. I'm just looking at it now, and it looks like crap. But um the the what are we going to do about ICE and this private police force that's going to have more money than the Russian military? Um, it's an enormous issue, and there's no simple plan here. The most important thing we can do is to continue to degrade Trump's standing, so it becomes much harder for him to look like the actions that he's contemplating in the back of his head, right? And Stephen Miller with his evil cabal are contemplating. It will become much harder for them to execute if his standing and his legitimacy is questioned. Um, and I think one of the things that's really important about this moment, right, is is that we don't know what's going to happen. And when you hear commentators, I think that we all have sort of a simplistic view of history, which is that we often read about history after it's happened, you know? And so it seems like, well, of course we won World War II and the bad guys lost. But when you're in it, what's remarkable about this last 10 years is that we never know what's going to happen, right? And nobody can know the future. Nobody can predict the future. Nobody, and there are people who are making reasonable judgments about what's going to happen. But I have found in the last this year that there has been so much more certainty about things that were going to happen than are warranted. And as somebody who's been in this game for 33 years full time, right? I can tell you that you never know what's going to happen next week. I mean, what happened this week was completely unpredictable. The fact that the country turned on him on immigration, this was not a given. I mean, it was something that was likely, but it didn't mean it was going to happen. And until these things happen, which is why you have to keep fighting because you never know when something is going to take hold, right? I mean, the Syrian opposition had been fighting the Syrian government for decades, and then finally one day they fell, right? You don't, if you're not pushing and pushing and pushing, you don't know when these things are going to happen. And I do think that one of the things that I think is something that needs to sort of disappear is this notion that Democrats are bad at messaging and are not doing anything. I mean, you can't look at all this data and conclude that we weren't effective at some of what we've been doing over the last few months. We haven't been overperforming in elections, right? Abby Spanberger isn't raising crazy amounts of money and has a huge polling lead. I mean, all of these narratives about Democrats being weak, I think, are largely bullshit, and I reject them. And it goes back to I think that people are using it to advance their own institutions or organizations, their own political careers. I just don't think it's accurate. And tomorrow, Ken Martin's going to come join us, right? He's going to be live. I hope all of you come at 2:15 to see the interview I'm going to be doing with him. We get to hear from him directly to talk about what's happening with the party. But I think we got to stop beating ourselves up so much. I mean, we're not where we want to be, and we've had losses, but we're also, Trump is struggling, and this is what we needed. This was the first in a chess match, right? This was the first thing that needed to happen, and it's happened. And obviously, we played a role in this. I mean, one of the things I think has been discounted is how much communication senators and congressmen are doing back home to their own districts and back to the states that they live in addition to going into red states. There's been wild increase in communication from Congress back into districts, which is giving far more of our citizens information about what's happening than they normally get. And I think it's also, as I discussed with Tara McGowan, the success of this new, more muscular pro-democracy media of Courier Newsroom and Midas Touch and Hopium and Contrarian and all the things that have spun up, that are giving all of you far more access to information than we had before. And so, I am, we are neither where we want to be, nor are we, on a puddle of water on the floor, right? Like we have fought hard. Our leaders are getting better at all this. We are developing capacity. Tomorrow, many of you are going to be doing events around Good Trouble Day. Good luck with all that. I think it's really important. These continue to be critical to mobilize citizens. And I think we need to continue to call Congress every day. As all of you know, I believe it is all of you, I hope, every day make your calls, right? Call your two senators, call your House member. Should just be something you do every day. I would do it if I had a senator or congressman here in Washington. I don't, who have votes anyway. And so, keep those are still the most important, in my view, it's still the most important things we can be doing is putting pressure on our elected leaders to do what's required of them now, right? Regardless of what party they're in. And so let me go to the other questions that, oh, about ICE. So what I wrote about yesterday, and let me talk about this a little bit. I've been working on immigration border issues for 2 decades. This is an area that I'm not a subject matter expert in a lot of stuff. I'm sort of a generalist, right, and political guy, but I ran a think tank for a long time, and one of the major areas that we were leaders in, thought leaders in, was on immigration and border issues. I think that one of the things we have to do now with ICE and Stephen Miller and what's happening is to really start to paint a picture of what the plan is, right? Like, what are they trying to do? And they are really like trying to remove 15 million people out of the country. 4, 5, 6% of our workforce, 4 to 5, 6% of our population, depending on how you cut this. Many of them are have American citizen children or spouses or brothers and sisters and are integrated into our economy. Almost every one of these people work because if you're an undocumented immigrant or TPS holder and not a green card holder, you're not eligible for any public welfare programs. And so you're not eligible for Medicaid, Medicare, welfare, right? And so you have to work. And so virtually all these people are working or are not sitting on a couch, right? Like has been this term that has been used a lot by Republicans. And so what Stephen Miller is contemplating is a is that if their goal is to remove 3,000 people a day, that's a million people a year. That means 15 years of this, what we're seeing now. It will take 15 years to remove all the people they want to remove by putting military on the streets, raiding houses and communities, breaking up farms, destroying families. And the country's already turned on them. There's no reservoir of support for this, for continuing this, for even continuing it next week, let alone for 15 years, right? The second thing is that what they're doing, and this is something that I have to happened after David Leopold came on, and I need to sort of get deeper into the policy side of this. They have made a unilateral policy change last Friday, it appears, that essentially removes due process for all undocumented immigrants in the country, meaning that they can be detained indefinitely for years while they wait their immigration trials. This is a very big deal because the way it works now with most undocumented immigrants or people who've made asylum claims is that you have a day in court where you get to make your case. And because of the court backlog, it can take 4 or 5 years, right, for you to go. And while you're there and waiting, you work and you have a job and you have a family and you're doing stuff, right? And what they're now saying is they don't want that. They don't want people to be released into the interior of the country, which they call catch and release. They want people in detention facilities, meaning that they won't be working, paying taxes, feeding their family, contributing to society. They will be in a jail, in a detention facility, in a place like in the Everglades. And the cost of that is astronomical, right? Loss of tax revenue. You have families now that have lost their main breadwinner in many cases, right? Kids, American citizen kids, orphaned by the detention process. And then people put in detention for 2, 3, 4 years. We have to pay their meals, we have to pay their housing, right? All this stuff. It's insane. Like on all, it is literally, and in the piece that I shared at Hopium, you had Mark Krikorian, who's one of these right-wing architects of this whole strategy, one of Stephen Miller's running buddies, say, look, yeah, this is going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of money, you know? And there's no, and the reason they want to do it is they want to throw people into detention facilities so they're more likely to self-deport and leave and not wait out the court date and just get the fuck out of here. And so this is a terror campaign. They're terrorizing communities all across the country. And I don't think this is sustainable for them. I don't think they have the backing of the public to carry this on, even though they may have in these authoritarian fantasies that they have and their need to restore their manhood and be strong and big, right? All this stuff. Where's Bowser, right? Like to do the big thing, right? Is that I don't think they're going to be able to pull this off because it's so insane. It's so fucking insane. It's so inhumane. It's going to destroy our economy. People are not going to put up with it. And, I heard a story on NPR last week. I was driving around and this is one of these things that but when you hear it, it's kind of incredible. And there was a farmer who said, a lot of the attention has been on crops, drying up and rotting because of workers disappearing. He said, the real thing everyone should be worried about is what's happening on farms that have animals. He said, because on farms that have animals, we have very rigorous safety regimes to make sure that the animals don't get sick and the food supply isn't poisoned and that animals don't catch disease that they then spread throughout communities. He said what Trump is doing is creating a national biohazard that could poison our food supply and destroy animal stocks all across the country. And I listened to this interview at NPR and I was like, wow, like I kind of understood that, but like hearing a guy say that, and then he talked about a farm in New Mexico that was a ranch that had cattle where 60% of, the ranch hands didn't disappeared and were no longer there. And he said that farm cannot maintain nationally mandated safety standards any longer. And so what are they going to do? Kill all their livestock? What are they going to do? Right? Like, and this is happening now all across the country. This is so fucking crazy. And so I think that we cannot immediately go and push the button of the worst case, even though with Trump, everything is the worst case. I think we have to fight this, but I think we're on stronger ground here than it feels today. Because I think that once the country really understands, and I think they will, because this is part of our job, right, is to tell these stories, is that there's going to be, I think Republican governors are going to start trying to save farms in their states. I mean, this is the threat to non-corporate agriculture in the United States is extreme right now. And this is, threatening our food supply. It's going to dramatically raise prices of all food. You're already starting to see grocery prices go way up. We now have the tomato agreement that we had with Mexico apparently was abrogated by our government, meaning that tomato prices are going to go through the roof. We may not have tomatoes during the winter time like we've had now since NAFTA passed in 1993. Many of the winter tomatoes that we get come from Mexico, from northern Mexico. And so, we're going to start having things like no tomatoes. How do you make pasta and how do you, like do all this? Like our lives are going to start being radically altered by Trump's mania and his insanity. And so I know that this can sound overly optimistic, but I don't know that that's not going to happen either. And I think we have to be careful not to immediately go into this place of darkness and to recognize again that our work has mattered. We've put points on the board. And yeah, we're going to have to develop a national strategy to really contest what's about to happen with ICE. We don't have that yet, but this is a new thing. We need to develop it together. It didn't have to happen overnight, right? We've had other things we needed to do, beating him up on the tariffs and making sure we pummel him on Medicaid. And we've seen the Republicans, by the way. I've been writing about this all week. We had this other, I should have mentioned this in the weakening. They are now openly talking about unraveling parts of the big ugly bill that they know are unpopular. In the next, as we go into this debate about the budget in the fall and the winter, they are retreating from this bill that they passed already. It passed a few days ago. I mean, Trump signed into law a few days ago. So when you look at them, what you're seeing is that we have this image of strength, but really what you're seeing is retreat and desperation and cowardness, on their side. And we have to balance that with the sense of loss that we all have for the things that they are breaking. And let me see what else, other questions. Lincoln has been sending me notes here. Yeah, look, I mean, the Department of Education is going to be significantly cut, and the USAID has disappeared, and NIH has been severely weakened, and NOAA and the National Weather Service are struggling. FEMA, he may disappear FEMA. We don't know, right? There's been incredible damage, but one of the things I've been talking about is that what is going to happen now is that all of these cuts now have to get put into the budget. And the fiscal year starts October 1st. The way our budgets work in Washington, it's October to October. The Republicans will have to pass a budget that has to be passed by the House and the Senate to authorize and appropriate money to be spent by Trump and the executive branch. And they're going to have to take all of this ugly stuff, right? The plussing up of ICE, and the building of the detention centers and the gutting of the Department of Education and the weakening of FEMA, And all these things that they've done, the cutting of Medicaid, the gutting of the ACA, this is now all going to have to be put into a bill that's going to have to go through various votes where it isn't now Trump just cutting stuff, but the senators and House members are now going to take ownership over all of this stuff that Trump has been doing. And they're going to have to put their names to it and they're going to have to back it. And what it means is that we have an incredible opportunity over the next 5 months, as I've been saying, to talk to the American people about what they're doing and to make this now a Republican problem and not just a Trump problem, right? That they're all about to have to vote on this terribly ugly stuff that they've done in the big ugly bill, which has to now get institutionalized into an actual, the actual annual budget, right, for the whole federal government, and all the ugly stuff Trump has done. So, for example, they're going to have to vote unknowingly killing 14 million people around the world by the vaporizing of USAID, right? Now, all the Republicans in Congress are going to have to sign on to that. All going to have blood on their hands of the poorest children in the world for the rest of their lives. Today, they don't have that, right? Trump has that, but now they're going to have that. They're going to have the blood on their hands of weakening FEMA and NOAA and whatever it is they're going to do. They're going to have the tragedy of what's going to happen with the weakening of the Department of Education and kids of special needs and all the things that are going to happen. This is going to go from being abstract to proximate to material, and they're going to have to vote on it. And we're going to have to do our job, which is to continue to educate the American people about who they become and what they want and their vision for the country, which has already been rejected by the country, right? The country has already rejected this, and they're going to have to now shove all of this stuff down the country's throat in this budget fight that's going to happen this fall. And as some of you have noted tonight and also in communications, to pass this budget in the Senate, you need 60 votes. You need 60 votes, not a reconciliation. And so we have some leverage here and we need to use it. And we need to do what we've been doing, which is mitigating the damage, but also making them own this crazy shit, making them own the appropriation of $40 billion to build detention centers where people aren't bathing and having food with worms and all the things, the torture that is going on, the stories coming out of the ICE detention facilities all across the country. This is, inhumane. They're breaking the Geneva Convention rules. I mean, these guys are doing bad stuff. And now the senators are going to have to own all of this and the congressman too. And that changes the game here. These Republicans are scared. They think they're going to lose. Their approval rating is in the crapper, right? Spanberger and Sherrill, and we'll see what happens in New York. New York is a lot more complicated, right? But Spanberger and Sherrill are likely to win by very large margins right before the Republicans have to go vote on this budget. And, having these kind of sweeping victories, this is why we have to work as hard as we can to make their margins as big as possible, because that stuff will have an incredible impact on the ability for Trump, for the sense that this agenda that they're pursuing is working when it will just been roundly rejected in 2 states. And so these elections really matter in November. I think the New York election will have less of an impact on Congress. I think Virginia and New Jersey will have more of an impact on the House and Senate Republicans than our largest Democratic city in the country. And so I think I'll end with this, which is I think we're in a moment of incredible opportunity, and we need to seize it together, everybody. I mean, this is really important, this work we're doing. I love being in this community with all of you. This has been a brutal year. I hope all of you get to have some summer. I think things are going to start slowing down a little bit. Trump is going to continue to need his narcissistic need to be at the center of attention every day. But what's he going to do? I mean, all these big things he's tried to do have all backfired on him. And that's what I mean. Like, the dude is playing his cards and he keeps losing. And like, they have to be really worried about the state of their thing. And the evidence of that is that, their Hail Mary in Texas and this sort of playing around with the election systems, which we're going to learn more about. And remember, everybody, many of the battleground states, Democratic governors and attorney generals and mayors control the election systems. It's this idea that there's some way they can really screw with all these democratic states. It's hard. It's not impossible, but this isn't, and our democratic leaders are not going to roll over and play dead here and make it easy for them to, screw around with stuff. I mean, Trump tried really hard in 2020 and it didn't work, right? And he got beat and we beat him. And so in all of this. So, chins up, see this moment as one of opportunity. Be proud that we've been able to degrade him as much as we have this quickly. It's a huge collective achievement. But man, we all know we got a lot of work ahead of us and really important work. And I'm so proud to be in this fight with all of you every day. Grateful to have been part of this community. And we've done amazing things together over the last 2 years, but our most important work still lies ahead. Keep fighting, everybody. Have a good night. Take care.